So I have a pretty large bingo card of ideas about why people are child free.
Okay.
It's like my Zoom show won't show it, but it's a whole lot of notes
Okay.
based on my personal experience. But I keep getting blown out of the water by people telling me stuff that I never thought of. So I'm just going to ask you, what are the factors that made you decide to be child free or want to be child free or end up being child free?
So when I was a kid, growing up, I mean, I'm 1975, we're Gen X and we kind of had that societal expectation. So I always just thought that's just what you do. I remember thinking I'm going to turn 25 in the year 2000. So by then I'll have, three kids, two boys and a girl. And I thought that would feel so old. That would feel so mature. And then it just never took. Like I never had that moment where I'm like, hey, I want to have a kid. I've never been the person who sees babies and like I don't want to hold them. I don't have like a nurturing. It might also because I'm the youngest of four, but I
Mhm.
never had a lot of familiarity with babies. And I remember at a very young age learning about adoption. My cousin's adopted, and that's probably where it came from. And thinking, well, that's really messed up that there's kids who don't have homes. Like I just thought that was just as you start to have this realization that the world isn't unfair, that the
Mhm.
world is unfair, that there's, maybe in three and four or five, you think everyone's got the same deal. But I remember at a young age just thinking that was messed up, that everyone should have a family. And I think at a young age, I started thinking, well, maybe I'd be the one to adopt. And so that little story of like having three kids, I remember thinking, well, maybe I'll adopt one. And it was still kind of like playing with dolls and that kind of level. And then honestly, as I got older, I really enjoyed being single or dating. I really enjoyed my autonomy. I enjoyed my decision making. I thought more about adoption if the time came, but I just never had that biological clock. Everyone told me like, "Oh yeah, you're going to see babies. You're going to smell their head. You're going to have these bonding moments." And I remember thinking to myself like, the idea of a human life growing in me, it just never took. I never had that. Like, I just never caught baby fever. Like, to this day, if I see a puppy or a kitten, I will grab that thing. If someone has a question, I'm like, oh, yeah, here's how you trim their nails, or here's how you do this, and cleaning ears. And all these things are just almost second nature to me. Like, one of my dreams, I want to someday after I retire, have a gray muzzle rescue. I want to go adopt all the old cats and dogs and just give them really good lives. But I've never had that for kids. And so I think it was more of, it wasn't like I had a moment where I said, I don't want kids. It's just, I never did. I just never had it beyond the childlike thing. So by the time, so with my first husband, James, I remember it was on our first date. Oddly enough, we actually talked about that. And he has two sons, and it had already gotten a vasectomy, but also had beliefs about it. And I did not, I was still able to have children. And I was 32, so I was still within the age of it. And I remember just saying, like, I don't think I ever want that, but maybe adopting just because it seems like the right thing to do, or fostering or something. And then if you remember the story with us is when we got married, we ended up taking on my first cousin's kids. So my first cousin had two 14-year-old twins. And so they came to live with us for 4 years through high school, 14 to 18. And that kind of cemented it too. I'm glad I did it. It was very difficult. And if I had any doubts, I was like, I missed the relationship of being the fun aunt. I did not like the responsibility of being the parent. Like we did it all. We dinner together every night. I went to every parent conf or every back to school night, every open house. I'm proud of the job I did there, but I didn't enjoy it. I think some people like thrive in that role. I
Mhm.
just didn't like it. So yeah, it was more of just like realizing that even though I'd been raised to kind of expect that, there was a moment when it was like, I don't have to do that. And I'm glad that I had, like my mom, for example, my mom has four children, none of us had kids. Like, how
Interesting.
disappointed must she have been? And she always was so positive, and she always said, "You do what you do. Like, this is your life, this is your path." She would have been a phenomenal grandmother, but take the lack of pressure with my being allowed to come around to it, I realized it wasn't for me. I think I might have been one of those mothers. I would have loved my kids, but I think I would have been one of those mothers who had moments, the what ifs. And I know a lot of moms do, but I don't think I would have been as good as mother as I would have wanted to be. I think I would have had regrets and I would have felt ashamed of those regrets. And so I look at my life now and I'm really, really happy. So ironically, my second husband, my current husband, he had kids at 19, he got
Oh,
married at 19,
wow.
4 children. They're all fully grown. I get along beautifully with them. The eldest has a baby, so I'm now a grandmother.
What?
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
That's the hard part.
My grandson Luke is a year and a half. He's become a grandma's boy. He calls me, come on, and wants always to be around me. And then she's pregnant again. So I'm in this amazing world where I got to skip being a parent. And now I'm really enjoying being a grandmother. And like we're going to go see them at the end of January. And so I really got blessed in that sense because I love him. He's amazing. But I still don't have this thing of like when I leave at the end of the night, I'm okay leaving. I don't have this thing where like I need to stay with this baby forever. I just don't have that. Whereas I would kidnap one of their dogs in a heartbeat. I love my grandpuppies and they're amazing. So yeah, I think it's kind of just like my personal evolution and it just
Okay.
never took. And I'm really glad I never felt the pressure that it had to take. One
Mhm.
thing I did have is I had a couple scares. And so that was always my thought process of like, you're young and I was always on birth control. This is not really the story, but it was an interesting that happened. I'm not sure if it's a thing women share, but I was on birth control, the pill for like, I don't know, on and off for 20 years. And then at one point, those little tiny itty bitty pills are so easy to swallow. I would swallow it, it would just come back up and I would swallow it and it would come back up. And I tried to listen to my body and I realized my body was telling me, we're done with this. We're not doing the pill anymore. And I mean, I was still fertile. And so coincidentally, life brought me to men with vasectomies, which are amazing. My ex-husband and then the boyfriend I had after had vasectomies, but it was interesting because I was in a complex place where I was like, I don't think I can do that kind of birth control anymore. And the options are so weird, there's pain and like I did Depo for 2 years. But when I had my scares, I'd always have the what do I do? And I think I would have had them, but I would have considered it was tricky because what do you do? Then do you put
Yeah,
them up for adoption and put them in the very same system? So I think that's an interesting thing about women without children is we all have had those moments of like even women who are infertile, I'm sure before they knew
right.
that moment of fear. So I'm always interested to hear kind of like what that complexity must have been. So,
I found out when I moved to California that if we had a heat wave, I'd skip a period. If I had something stressful happen in my life, I'd skip a period.
wow.
And there was a time, and because I was perimenopausal,
Sure.
and nobody really talked about it. I mean, 10 years ago, nobody talked about it.
Yes.
And so I just remember kind of needing to just buy a 3 pack of pregnancy tests to like, but the problem is you get the brain fog and you just keep forgetting to buy. And so, the sweet gay boy at work who's like, well, are you pregnant at my desk every morning? Like, well, like there was this one time where I was going to lose my contract. We just had the fires near our house, so it was very, very, very hot and stressful. And then I had actually a friend that passed from cancer. And I
Oh,
mean, and my husband had to leave his job. So I mean, like all four of those things hit in like 2 weeks.
oh God.
And my body just said, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a period for, 90 days. And I kept forgetting to check. But I was like, I don't think I am. I don't think I am. And I was right. I wasn't. But I laugh because if I had been, like the minute we went on lockdown, I would have had I don't know, 20-month-old.
Jesus Christ, can you imagine?
I mean, I would have been having a baby at 44, and I would have been, I was 46 when we went into lockdown. So can you imagine?
God. We had a scare when I first met Mike. We had a scare about a month in, and I was like, I'm 47. Like,
Mhm.
it's not going to be that. And so, one thing about my husband is he is baby crazy. He,
Oh.
he had the 4 kids. He got a vasectomy because his wife would have easily had more, but he's like, oh my God, we'll have to keep it. I want it so bad. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm 47. There's no way I'm pregnant. But he was already like, okay, we're doing it. It's like a month in. It's definitely sweet about him, but talk about he and I have joked about meeting at the right time because if we'd met earlier, he would have definitely wanted more kids. And it's like, nope. And so they're can't do it. Sorry, not going to happen. So it's interesting though. Yeah, because I do know older women who have babies late. I mean, some of them work really hard to have them and more power to them. But oh, can you imagine? You know, you mentioned the menopause and perimenopause. Like I'm in peri, and I definitely have been starting conversations about it and researching a little more and opening up that conversation. So one thing I do, one way I advocate is I talk to my students about things. So I work with a very large Hispanic population, and I've always talked very freely about my decision not to have children because I think women need to see that. I think girls need to
Yes.
see, especially within
Yes.
that population.
Nobody, it was so abnormal when we were growing up.
It
I
was so
remember that
funny.
one weird couple on the next street that didn't have children and how we were kind of expected to think they were weird.
And you literally had a name of an old maid. I mean, you
Mhm.
literally would insult someone, a woman, or if she decided to stay single. But yeah, it's weird how many connections we had of your worth tied to that.
Yes.
And within the Hispanic population too, the family is so important that I would say this and I'd have kids like, it's gotten better now, but I'd have kids look at me like, but you'd be such a good mom, miss. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to. I chose not to. And they're always like, huh. Like I think a good, like a discussion opener. And now I find myself talking to my students a bit about menopause just to get the word out there and a little comfort level. Like one thing I learned recently, and this is just minor, I know I'm going down the sidetrack, but we were talking about the Salem witch trials. You know, all the women killed during the Salem witch trials were menopausal, 100%. And we look at the history of how women were treated and how our worth went down so much once we could no longer have children.
Yes.
You know, a husband could have a wife committed and it would be called hysteria. I
Yep.
mean, you literally could do that. I'm following this really good Dr. Sims. I don't know if you know her, but she has some really incredible podcasts, and she talks about kind of the perception, and she studies like nutrition and health. But we've had so little focus. It's
Hmm.
like we as women are so valued for one thing, and that is our ability to reproduce. I forgot who it was, but someone put it well that menopause is us returning to our natural state, that we are born who we are. For a while, we go through this crazy time period when we can produce life. So our body goes crazy. And then we're allowed to return back to who we really are. And I
Hmm.
thought that was a wonderful way to phrase it. Like we are not defined by our ability to produce life. You know, we are defined by our choices and decisions. But I do think we are still very seen as like, this is your worth, you know, you kind of lose that if you don't have children. So I think there's a little bit, I don't get too much slack, but I have
Good.
heard people. Yeah, I have heard people. I'm sure you have too. It's like, oh, why'd you get married if you didn't want to have kids? It's like, I don't
Yeah, I
know.
mean, okay, so I'm 41 and living in Southern California, which you think is a pretty like liberal place. And I remember I went to my doctor's office and I saw there was like a massage therapist on staff, and I'd treat myself once in a while and get a massage.
Me
And
too.
she's like, "So how have you been?" And I'm like, "Great, I just got married." "Oh, that's wonderful." And then she says, she was a sweet Hispanic lady and kind of older. She's like, "Are you going to have children now or later?" And I said, "I'm 41 and I'm a contractor. I don't think I'm going to have any."
Yeah, what's my third choice?